Welcome back to BBC News. It is 4 weeks tomorrow since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and in the last 24 hours or so, there have been reports of Ukrainian forces successfully fighting back in a town to the west of the capital and also in areas in the south. Ukrainian forces are reported to have retaken the town of Makariv, west of Kyiv, and they're also attacking Russian forces in the south of the country. The southern town of Voznesensk has already repelled an attack by the Russian army. But in the port of Mariupol, Ukraine's president says around 100,000 civilians are still trapped without food, water or heat. Officials say Russian bombing raids have turned the city into, quote, ashes. Well, let's speak once again to our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, who joins me as he normally does around this time every day as we take stock of where we are. And John, it is 4 weeks tomorrow, as I was saying. Your assessment then of where we are in this war?
Well, I think the first thing to say, Matthew, is actually springs out of the news items you've been reading. The Russian army isn't nearly as strong, as powerful, as all-conquering as we feared it would be. And the initiative still lies with the Ukrainian forces, who are defending their homeland. And of course, that is the strongest position that an army can have. I think, though, all the experts I've spoken to have been really surprised by how poorly the Russian troops have performed, how many of their senior officers have been killed, presumably because they had to go up to the front line to kind of urge on their troops and were picked off by snipers. So we've learned all those things. We've learned that NATO was a lot stronger when it came to it than we had expected, that individual countries didn't seek to do deals with Russia as Vladimir Putin must have thought they would. And we've seen that China is not nearly as strong in its support of Russia as we might have thought. It looked like a kind of duopoly between them. It isn't really quite like that. And China hasn't been using the kind of diplomatic and economic weapons that it could have used, because clearly it's not entirely happy about the way that Russia's gone about this and what it's doing and what the likely consequences are. But I'll tell you personally, Matthew, the thing that I feel most strongly about it is it's shown something pretty depressing. It's shown that we thought we were getting somewhere in international relations. We thought we were leaving the past behind us. And when you look at those appalling pictures of the millions and millions of refugees, really, it could just be an updated form of 1940 in Europe. It's very depressing in that sense.
Yes, you're exactly right. In a sense, we've rewound not just decades, but generations. You were talking about Russian forces there, John. I mean, in terms of the losses, I was listening to Lise Doucet earlier, reports it could be upward of around 15,000 Russian losses. That is more than the whole of the Afghanistan war for Russia. There is talk, and there have been reports of perhaps reinforcements from Belarus, around 10,000. How significant would that be if that indeed happened?
I don't think it's that significant in terms of fighting spirit, ability, experience, and so forth. Belarus is a country which has endured dictatorship for decades. There's none of the kind of fighting spirit you would expect in its troops. I've seen Belarusian troops in the past. Really, they're not as good as Russian ones. And as we've seen, the Russian ones themselves haven't been very good. That figure of 15,000 is very, very interesting. And until recently, the figure that everybody was talking about was 10,000. That's about a week ago. And the 10,000 was published in a Russian newspaper, which then promptly dropped the whole matter from its website. But clearly another sign that there's just not just one version of things going on in Russia, that just as we saw that the Russian Secret Service, the FSB, was betraying the whereabouts of death squads going to go to Ukraine to try to kill Zelensky, President Zelensky, so we're now seeing plenty of signs that there's serious doubt and an actual active dislike of the way the country's going in a lot of what the Russians used to call intelligentsia. That's to say, people like newspaper editors and politicians, indeed.
John Watts, you're talking about the Kremlin and Moscow. A brief thought on just openly talking about scenarios where nuclear weapons could be used. Your assessment of that?
Well, this is, I think, the most dangerous and worrying business. There's always been a difference between the Russians and the NATO powers in their kind of the sort of Bibles that they compile about how they will fight wars. And NATO's always been clear that any use of any nuclear weapon whatsoever will risk all-out nuclear war. The Russians haven't agreed with that. Their view is that they can use battlefield nuclear weapons in the same way that they might use, say, chemical weapons. It's not that they don't regard them as being just any old weapons that they can pick out of the box, but they do regard them as being relatively safe in terms of major international exchange of nuclear weapons. They think it'll be safe to use battlefield nuclear weapons. And nobody knows, of course, whether it is or not. And that's what's really dangerous, I think, at the moment.
A final thought about that NATO meeting tomorrow. We saw those pictures of Joe Biden setting off for that meeting in Brussels. How important do you think that meeting is likely to be? Because I heard one senior former NATO official saying a little earlier in the day that likening it to the German decision we had a couple of weeks ago, which was to fundamentally change their approach in terms of the military and foreign relations. He thought the same was true with NATO in this meeting ahead.
Well, and of course, the key fact that Joe Biden will face up to very enthusiastically is the way that the NATO alliance has stuck together. They'll all be slapping each other on the back about that. Of course, you can see there are differences. I mean, Hungary is taking a slightly different line. Poland takes quite a strongly different line in some respects. But essentially, that idea that NATO was a crumbling edifice is simply not true. I think that their main concern will be to work out ways to prevent the war extending into neighboring countries. They've got lots and lots of plans for helping neighboring countries in one way or another, whether they're members of NATO or not. And that's quite important. But also, I think it's really the key thing is that they will, I'm sure, privately be working out how they deal with any major extension of the war, chemical weapons, and even more so the battlefield nuclear weapons that I was talking about. And they'll have to get a unified stance on that, which they must feel will prevent the Russians from using those weapons.
Yes.
Very, very difficult when you've got a president who can't lose, mustn't be seen to lose, who finds himself actually losing and looks around for the kind of weapons that might just get him that little bit further in terms of the victory that he wants.
John, great to get your analysis. Thanks so much for joining us once again on the programme. That's John Simpson, our World Affairs editor. Well, let's continue with that meeting NATO is going to have tomorrow. The NATO Secretary General saying they would approve major increases in the forces deployed on the eastern flank in response to what we've seen from Russia. Here's Jens Stoltenberg.
NATO leaders will meet in Brussels tomorrow at a pivotal moment for our security. And I look forward to welcoming President Zelensky, who will address us during the meeting. President Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine is causing death and destruction every day. Allies stand united in support for the brave people of Ukraine and against the Kremlin's cruelty. Putin must end this war, allow aid and safe passage of civilians, and engage in real diplomacy. NATO allies have responded to this crisis with strong support for Ukraine and unprecedented costs for Russia.
Well, that was Jens Stoltenberg talking about the military aspect, but also, as you heard him there, talking about the humanitarian side, the aid that is being shipped to so many people that have fled across the borders, more than 3 million so far, and of course all of those people displaced within Ukraine. Well, my colleague Ben Brown is in the city of Lviv and sent us this a little earlier about the distribution of aid there.
Still lots of people who fled from their homes coming to aid distribution centres like this one in western Ukraine. 10 million people altogether and counting have left their homes. That is around about a quarter of the entire Ukrainian population been forced to flee from their homes. Around 3 million, more than 3 million have left the country. Some are staying in this more peaceful part of western Ukraine. This is the distribution centre where we are, and this is where volunteers are offering supplies of food, clothes, medicine, that kind of thing for the people who've come here from cities like Mariupol, like Kyiv, the capital, like Kharkiv, people who've been really traumatised by the 4 weeks of warfare so far. President Zelensky, Ukraine's president, has been, of course, making lots of appeals to the West for more help. He's been talking with virtual addresses to the parliaments around the world. His latest address was to the Japanese parliament.
In some villages which are occupied by the Russian troops, our people cannot even bury their dead relatives. And they have to bury them on site at their homes. Thousands of people, and among them 121 children, were dead. Millions of Ukrainians had to leave their homes, their normal life. Our northern, southern and eastern territories are left by people.
Well, the Russian advance in some parts of Ukraine appears to have slowed quite considerably, even stalled. And the Ukrainians appear to be fighting back in some areas and even recapturing territory. Our correspondent Andrew Harding has been to one town in the south of Ukraine, Voznesensk, and that is an extraordinary story because the relatively small population there, some 35,000 people, plus some Ukrainian troops, were able to fend off a Russian advance. Here's Andrew Harding's report.
In war, a single bridge can sometimes make all the difference. A bridge and a town determined to keep it from the enemy. And that's what happened here in Voznesensk, a quiet farming community that stood its ground. Security cameras captured the moment Russian tanks roared into town, determined to seize the bridge and beyond it, a clear road across southern Ukraine. But the locals were already setting a trap. All hands on deck, blocking off roads, guiding the Russians into an ambush. A local shopkeeper, Alexander, filmed himself on the front lines. You little beauties, he shouts. It was a colossal effort by the whole town, he says. We used hunting rifles, people threw bricks, old women loaded sandbags. The Russians didn't know where to look. I've never seen the community come together like that. As the invaders approached the bridge, the locals blew it up. At which point, these British anti-tank weapons played a decisive role. The Ukrainians destroyed almost every Russian vehicle, denying them the chance to seize the town and to rebuild the bridge. Tank tracks still mark Svetlana Nikolaevna's garden. Her outhouse took a direct hit. She says the Russians took 2 Ukrainian soldiers prisoner in there, and she feared they were going to kill them, but then the battle got out of hand. That's the blood of Russian soldiers who were sheltering in her house. While she hid in a cellar, her cottage became a Russian field hospital.
They left at night in such a hurry. They left almost everything behind. They just took their dead and wounded.
It may be Russia's heaviest defeat so far, their troops retreating far to the east. This town, this community achieved something remarkable here, but we need to put it in perspective. This war is only a few weeks old, and the Russians will almost certainly be back with more soldiers and a lot more firepower. Not surprisingly, the town hall is crowded with people wanting help getting out of Voznesensk. Others go straight to the 32-year-old mayor. He's well guarded these days, brimming with confidence, but realistic about what lies ahead. We know we can't win here without more anti-tank weapons, says Yevgeny Velichko. We're grateful for Western supplies, but we need more. We know the Russians will be back. Back for the bridge, and back for the town that stood its ground. Andrew Harding, BBC News, in Voznesensk, southern Ukraine.
Well, as Ben was telling us in Lviv, so many people coming to where he is in the west of the country. Nearly 6.5 million now in total considered to be internally displaced in Ukraine because of the fighting. Well, our correspondent Lucy Williamson is there at Lviv's main train station, and she sent this report.
There's a steady flow of people packing their bags, their children onto trains here at Lviv Central Railway Station. Now, lots of them, of course, heading west to Poland, but not all of them. Crowds of people, families, single women are also crowding onto trains like this one, heading east towards the conflict zones. This one is going towards Zaporizhia, and speaking to a few of the people on board, there's a lot of fear. One woman who's a teacher in Zaporizhia said she was absolutely terrified about going back, but she'd only come to Lviv to drop off her daughter and granddaughter, and she was going back to be with her family. And that's a theme we're hearing again and again from people who have found shelter here in Lviv, but who are heading back east towards the fighting. They're going to Kharkiv, they're going to Dnipro, places around there, and they say the hardest thing is being apart from family. Whatever the war brings, they say, it's better for them to be together.
Lucy Williamson in Lviv. Now, the US is putting more pressure on China over its trade practices and its relationship with Russia. They've also confirmed today it will drop tariffs on British steel and aluminium shipments, which were imposed by former President Donald Trump back in 2018. In exchange, the UK said it will end duties it'll put on American products like bourbon whiskey and Levi jeans. Well, let's head to New York and talk to our North America business correspondent Samira Hussein. And Samira, I know you've been talking to the US trade representative. Tell us a little more.
What's interesting is that given all of the geopolitical shifts that we've seen happening around the world, whether it be with regards to the pandemic or even Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it's really getting the United States now to change its ideas about what it means for global trade. And it wants to use its power to apply more pressure to China. Have a listen to what Ambassador Tai, the U.S. trade representative, had to say to me when I asked her about China.
We have to be clear-eyed about the challenges that we're facing. The kinds of practices that we see from non-market economy like China's, and the impacts that it has on our ability to thrive, to compete, our ability for our workers and our industries to continue to grow and to be able to compete fairly. So in terms of working together, I think it's a matter of how can we join forces? How can we speak louder when we do it together? And how can we be more effective in taking measures to defend the rights of our economies and our workers to grow and compete when we are facing a competitor that is really structured and operating on parameters very different from our own. The relationship between the United States and China on trade is one of profound consequence. We need to turn the page on the playbook. We can no longer just focus on encouraging, wheedling, demanding that China reform its economy. We need to be actively developing tools to defend our interests and our economic opportunity.
Of course, this all comes on the back of these good discussions that the United Kingdom has been having with the United States about potentially trying to restart negotiations in terms of a free trade agreement between the two countries. And what has been made clear by the Americans is that they really want to be using a lot more of their power to put pressure on countries like China and, of course, on countries like Russia.
Samira there, live in New York. Thanks very much for the latest on that aspect of the story. Now, one more story to bring you because the women's world number one, Ash Barty, has stunned the world of tennis by announcing her retirement at the age of 25. The Australian, who's won 3 Grand Slams, has not said what she plans to do next. The BBC's Simon Axton sent this report.
She's one of the most marketable stars of the game and insists she's leaving the sport proud and fulfilled. Ash Barty is the reigning Wimbledon champion and earlier this year won her home Grand Slam event in Australia to the delight of her legions of fans here. But then, on her Instagram account came this shock announcement.
I'll be retiring from tennis, and it's the first time I've actually said it out loud, and yeah, it's hard to say, but I'm so happy and I'm so ready, and I just know at the moment in my heart for me as a person, this is right. And I know I've done this before, but in a very different feeling, and I'm so grateful to everything that tennis has given me. It's given me all of my dreams plus more, but I know that the time is right now for me to step away and chase other dreams, and to put the rackets down.
Ash Barty says she wants to chase new dreams that don't necessarily involve travelling the world and being apart from her family. Here at her home club in Brisbane, the news has been met with a mix of shock and surprise, but also pride in what their local hero has achieved.
I love Ash Barty. The reason why I play tennis is Ash Barty.
And she's like so good, she's a freak, she just gets everything, she's so aggressive, great tennis player. She's amazing, there's no words for her, she's perfect.
I really liked watching her. I've seen that her grind and her fight to win every match she plays is really amazing.
Good job, 2 hands, you got it! Yeah!
Australia's Prime Minister also paid this tribute.
I particularly want to say thank you to you, Ash, for inspiring a generation of young people, and particularly a generation of young Indigenous people in this country. You are all class. Your commitment to excellence in your chosen field in tennis You're a great cricketer, you're a great tennis player. I'm sure anything you turned your hand to, you are going to be a great success, and I have no doubt that will be the case as you go forward with the next chapters in your life.
Today marks Barty's second retirement from the sport, having walked away from the game as a teenager and briefly taking up cricket. The 25-year-old will give a press conference on Thursday. All eyes now are on what comes next for a superstar who made her mark on the game she loves and has inspired young women in Australia and around the world to follow their sporting dreams. Simon Atkinson, BBC News in Brisbane, Australia.
Well, that's quite something, retiring at the age of 25. One latest line to bring you on Ukraine. The UK Prime Minister has just been speaking to Ukraine's president and told him he intends to use Thursday's G7 and NATO meetings in Brussels to increase the pressure on Putin's regime and work with partners to substantively increase defensive lethal aid to Ukraine. The Ukrainians calling for that. We know Joe Biden has already set off for that meeting. These are the pictures as he left the White House. We know the US planning to announce new sanctions tomorrow and also talk about enforcing the ones already in place. So those some of the latest lines on Ukraine. I'm back here with more in just a moment or two. Don't go away.